Welcome one and all to the Ouija God channel.
In the darkness of nighttime, as you lay down to sleep, in your dreams we will meet.
Lawrence was born in Pennsylvania on September 27th, 1940, as an unwanted child of a couple who had chosen to not have children. Lawrence was placed in an orphanage by his birth mother and was adopted by Mr. and Miss George Bittaker as an infant. Lawrence's adoptive father's work required the family to frequently move around the United States. Lawrence was first arrested for shoplifting at the age of 12. After further arrest for the same offense, Lawrence brought attention of juvenile authorities. Although reported to have an IQ of 138, Lawrence dropped out of high school in 1957. Within a year of dropping out, he had been arrested for car theft, a hit and run, and evading arrest. For these offenses, he was imprisoned at the California Youth Authority, where he remained until he was 18 years old. Lawrence discovered his adoptive parents had disowned him and had relocated to another state. Upon his release, Roy was born in Greeley, Colorado, on February 5th, 1948. Roy was conceived out of wedlock. His parents had married to avoid the social stigma surrounding
illegitimate
birth at the time. Roy's father worked in a scrapyard, and his mother was a drug-addicted housewife. Roy occasionally lived with his parents throughout his childhood, but was repeatedly placed in the care of foster families throughout the state of Colorado. While living with his birth parents at the age of 16, Roy visited the home of a female relative who was in her early 20s and began speaking to her in a sexually suggestive manner. She ordered him to leave her house and informed his father, who threatened to beat him. Roy then stole his father's car and drove into the Rocky Mountains, where he attempted to commit suicide by injecting air into an artery in his arm. He was later apprehended as a runaway and returned to live with his parents. Upon his return home, Roy's parents informed him that he and his younger sister were unwanted children, and that they intended to divorce when both of them reached the age of 18. A year later, Roy dropped out of school and joined the United States Navy. He was stationed in San Diego in 1965 and was deployed in 1969, although he did not see active combat. During his 4-month tour of duty, he was honorably discharged from the Navy after one tour. Lawrence bought a 1977 GMC cargo van, which had no side or rear windows and a big door on the passenger side through which the victims could be snatched. They nicknamed it the Murder Mac. In June, they abducted their first victim, a 16-year-old whom they forced into her truck, duct-taped her mouth, and bound her ankles and wrists. After raping, torturing, and killing her at a fire trail in a nearby mountain, they dumped her body in a canyon. The following month, they abducted an 18-year-old, took turns raping her, taunted her by encouraging her to scream, and then killed her. On September 3rd, they abducted 2 girls, a 15-year-old and a 13-year-old, and held them captive for 2 days, raping them and recording their captivity the entire time. Then they murdered both of them. They then abducted Shirley Sanders on September 30th and raped her, but she managed to escape. She was able to report the assault, but couldn't identify her attackers or remember the car's license plate number. The matter wasn't pursued any further. On October 30th, they abducted and murdered their last victim, Shirley Ledford, deciding to dump her body on a lawn instead of in the wilderness. Unlike their previous victims, she was raped and tortured while the car was being driven around, instead of when it was parked at the duo's usual killing site. The press nicknamed them the Toolbox Killer, since they were believed to be a single perpetrator. In October, Roy bragged about his and Lawrence's murders to Jimmy Dalton, a friend of theirs from prison, who initially thought the stories were lies. However, when Ledford's body was discovered, he reported Roy to his lawyer, who passed the information onto the Los Angeles Police Department. 2 police detectives began stalking out Roy and arrested him for marijuana possession and parole violation. When he was spotted dealing it on the street, Lawrence was arrested as well for abducting and raping Shirley Sanders. After a long interrogation, Roy confessed to being involved in the murders, but insisted that he was mainly an accomplice and had been high on drugs during the murders. Beginning to pin the murders on Lawrence, he was allowed to plea bargain, enabling him to place all of the blame on Lawrence. Roy also helped investigators find the bodies. Both men were charged on several accounts of kidnapping, rape, robbery, deviant sexual assault, criminal conspiracy, and murder, each blaming the other. When the audio recordings they made of their murders turned up, Roy was revealed to have been an active participant, ultimately likely due to his assistance in the investigation. Roy was sentenced to 45 years to life in prison. In 2010, he applied for parole and was denied. Being eligible for another 10 years, Lawrence was sentenced to death and died while waiting execution. In 2019, Roy became eligible for parole in 2009, only to be denied. He was denied parole again in 2019 and died on February 24th of 2020. Unlike all my other faked or fact videos, I'm going to go ahead and tell you now whether this story is true or false. So make sure that you pause the video now and comment down below whether you think this story is faked or fact. And I'm going to go ahead now and tell you if it's true or if it's false.
Did you at any time ever use an ice pick?
No, sir.
You struck Miss Lamp with a sledgehammer. Do you recall the sledgehammer which was introduced?
Yes, sir, I recall it.
Was that true?
No, sir.
Lawrence Bittaker, with an IQ of 138, dragged high school girls into his van, then murdered them by twisting a coat hanger around their throat with a pair of pliers. When his tape recording of one murder was played in court, people rushed outside and vomited.
I touched Miss Ledford on the breast with cold metal pliers. And if you listen to the tape, you'll hear those pliers being replaced in the toolbox a few seconds later.
Oh, what did you touch her on the breast for with a pair of pliers?
To shock her with the cold metal.
While crime writer Candice Fox was living in America for a year, she began writing to a serial killer.
Candice Fox joins us now in the studio. Candice, thank you so much for coming in this morning.
Thanks for having me.
What did you first feel when you heard that this criminal who was on death row that you had so many dealings with died?
Just confusion, total confusion, because, you know, I had spent a couple of years writing to him and asking him everything I possibly could about his crimes and about himself. And then he's died, and I just felt nothing. My major question for him was, why did you do this? What led you into this life where you spent this time murdering these young girls? And I imagined that he would tell me, you know, how it made him feel, and that he hated women, and that it was a power thing for him. But he just refused to take responsibility for what he'd done. He had all of these excuses. Oh, I had a terrible childhood. I fell in with the wrong crowd. You know, no one ever taught me empathy. So for 2 years, I think I was just pummeling him with questions, trying to get him to admit, you know, what he had done and that he was responsible for it. His partner, Roy Norris, I've seen some affidavits from him where he fully admits and says, I'm a monster, I'm a rapist, and this is why I do it. But Lawrence was much more of an enigma in that way. And I think that a lot of the reason that this didn't get much press is that the details of this crime are just so horrific. He said to me, you know, for 30 plus years in my life, I was a great person, lots of friends, never hurt anyone. And yes, I killed all these women. And then for 30 plus years, you know, same thing, great person, lots of friends, haven't hurt anyone. So really, if you look at the span of my life, I haven't been that bad of a person. And you think, wow, like that is even more terrifying than your Hannibal Lecter type of person, because he says it so warmly. And you think, you know, if I met this person at a bus stop or something and I didn't know what he was capable of, he's so warm and friendly and normal looking. That's even more scary to me, I think, than the Hannibal Lecter.